You are listening to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud, a resource of Church on Bayshore. We typically want every matter of faith in life to have crystal clear answers, but it isn't always that easy. Recorded on the Boggy Bayou of Niceville, Florida, and hosted by James Ross and Justin Wyatt, pastors at Church on Bayshore, this podcast dives into how to help Christians think with a kingdom mentality about topics that sometimes get muddy and bog us down. So let's dive in. Hey everyone, and welcome to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud. We are thankful that you are joining us for week 3 of the leading podcast sensation, world-changing resource from Church on Bayshore. And this week, we are in week 3 of our series, God and Country. I am joined by lead pastor Church on Bayshore, my friend James Ross. And this week, we have the joy, the privilege of having Dean Inserra joining us from Tallahassee, Florida. Dean is the pastor of City Church in Tallahassee, and you have known James for a little while, and so James reached out to you. So we just want to first say thank you for joining us. Really quickly, just how do you know James? Why don't you just enlighten us a little bit about this guy?
Yeah, James is one of my great friends in the ministry. It's great to be with you guys, by the way. And we have just really been in good touch because we sort of started planting at the same time before church planting was really a major thing. You know, but back then you were kind of viewed as either you couldn't make it in a real church or you were rebellious. So
which one were you? No.
Probably both. So we've kind of had that camaraderie out of the gate, you know, and just sort of like very like-minded and just how we view ministry and just the scriptures. And so had a good friendship for a long time. So it's cool to be on this podcast with you guys. James also comes and preaches at our church a decent amount. A lot of times when I'm gone on a Sunday in the summertime, he'll come over and fill in for me. So I just trust him in our pulpit, and our folks love hearing from him. So it's cool to be the other way around and be a guest in your world today.
So let me just be clear, that's happened more than once. So
we
invited back. So
we have him back. That's the test. You can invite it back.
That guy, calling in the C team. No, just kidding. So Dean is, in addition to being a pastor and a leader in his community, an all-around great guy, has written a book that was published a few years ago called The Unsaved Christian. I'm holding it up right here. And I know in our church, many people, our leaders have read this, and many other people have read this. It's been a great resource just for really digging into challenging perceptions, worldviews, assumptions of the gospel, especially as we are here in the South. And so there's a chapter in this book it's chapter 10, called God Shed His Grace on Thee, Partisans, Politics, and Prosperity. So in this chapter, Dean, you dive in a little bit into what it means, the concept of God and country and what that means. So I want you just to go ahead and just share a little bit why you felt compelled to include a chapter about God and country in a book called The Unsaved Christian.
Yeah, well, I think it's a major tenet of cultural Christianity. And by unsaved Christian, I mean people who would claim to be Christians, but their reason for believing so or claiming so has nothing to do with what the Bible would present as actually saving faith. So basically, their faith is in the fact that they're good people. They're not atheists. That, like you said, they believe in God. But is that God actually the God of the Bible? Or is it more of a lowercase g God? Usually that God's very vague, very generic. He's kind of like the Force from Star Wars, or he is a kind of a grandpa figure in the sky, or a divine Santa Claus, a moral compass, somewhere sort of in that range. Or they come from a Christian family, like their grandmother was actually like a genuine Christian. So because of that sort of legacy or heritage in the family, that still causes them to pray before a meal, or all show up on Mother's Day to grandma's church, those type of things. They would all claim to be Christians. And by that, they just really mean they're not Jewish, they're not Muslims, they're not atheists, they're not Buddhists. Therefore, they're Christians. And where God and country comes into play is that it's almost as if it's synonymous, their idea of being a Christian, with being American. Mm-hmm. They almost see it as one and the same, like as in like patriotism is part of what it means to be a Christian. Rather than, okay, how does being a Christian really set the focus for how I view things like the world, my country, patriotism, all those type of things, rather than it being like a lens we see through to those other things, our faith. It's intertwined, mingled, they're kind of one and the same. So that God, again, is it the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Is it Yahweh? I mean, probably, first, it's not my job to judge that. But the truth is, the God in the scriptures is not the God of a Lee Greenwood song. I mean, I'm not saying Lee Greenwood doesn't believe in God. I think he's a believer, but you can be the most marginal, barely have any faith in Jesus at all whatsoever, and sing that song to the top of your lungs, right? And get tears and get chill bumps when you don't even really hold to any doctrines of the faith, but you'll sing, God bless the USA, or at a baseball game, you'll sing God bless America to the top of your lungs. And the reality is, it's just sort of, and this is going to sound very non-sophisticated, it's just sort of a thing we do. I mean, it really is. It's hard to describe even, because it's intertwined into everything else. And we have to figure out how to speak to it, because I think it's a discipleship hurdle. Not only that, but an evangelism hurdle, because people are actually confused about what it really means to believe in God. And they think it basically is the idea of loving your country and being a good person, rather than actually the God of the scriptures ultimately revealed in Jesus Christ.
In the culture where you are, how do you engage people who think they're Christians based on what you just said, that, well, I believe in God?
Well, the issue is we have to help them see that their view of God actually matters. I think it was Tozer who said the most important thing about you is what comes to your mind when you think about God.
Yeah.
And that's really true. And the reality is, our God is not lowercase g. He's not generic. He's not vague. He's made himself known in the scriptures. In the book of Hebrews, it says that he's spoken to us in these ways. He spoke through the law, spoke through the prophets. Now he's spoken to us through his son. So we have to make sure that the God that they believe in, that they understand that it's the God, that they make sure it lines up with the God of the scriptures. I think it all starts there, because human sin's not going to be a big deal if there's a generic God. If God's just sort of a love pirate in the sky, or just kind of your buddy or your imaginary friend, or somebody to take the wheel when something goes wrong, you're just going to be somebody who messes up sometimes, makes mistakes, no big deal. But if God is the God of the scriptures, you're going to realize your sin's a massive deal, because he's a holy God that won't let sin go unpunished. And then that's going to set up for, okay, then what do I do about that? Which will hopefully lead us to point people to Christ and why he came in the first place. But none of that's really going to matter. They're going to like Jesus, but not think they need Jesus for salvation until they have the right view of God. And again, I want to make sure that I'm clear that I don't think I'm the judge of what a right view of God is and what isn't. That is not my job. I do not have that authority, but the Bible does. So we want to look to the scriptures for that idea. And in terms of patriotism, that's interesting too, because what does that actually even mean? I think where we have to and the gospel and our approach to how we follow Jesus doesn't change based on our setting. There's contextualization, but if you weren't in the military, if you never joined the military, I hope your faith wouldn't be different, right? If you moved your family to Austria tomorrow and became Austrian citizens over a long haul, however long that process takes over there, I hope that wouldn't change your faith at all. That's where patriotism is a problem. When your Christian faith is so tied to your status as a military member, as your status as an American, whatever it might be, that we have to walk on eggshells around you to talk about how this is not the priority for our lives. Mm-hmm. And that can be really troubling sometimes. It's almost like it's immune, like you can't say a word about it, like you're not even allowed to ask a question, because it's America and it's patriotism and it's veterans and it's we served. And so my suggestion to that is our posture should be gratefulness as Christians. We should be a grateful people. Yeah. So towards our military, we should be grateful. Towards our military, to our country, we should be grateful for the freedoms we have. And how we know when we have a problem is if we get more offended by someone making a comment about the problems in America than we do someone using the scriptures wrong. Mm-hmm. And for James and myself as senior pastors, we're at a moment where we can get away with saying the wrong thing biblically or theologically before we could get away with saying what in someone else's eyes is the wrong thing politically. And we have to speak to that. We have to talk about that, military town or not. You have to talk about that. It's a big crisis for discipleship right now.
Yeah, you said in the book on page 129, one can simultaneously be grateful for the privilege of living in America and thank God for those who defend our freedom while not missing the fact that our country morally resembles Babylon more than a city on a hill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think that that's probably caused this kind of unhealthy identity, is what I would say, has caused people to maybe overlook cultural sin, you think?
Yeah, I think that can really be almost like the dividing line of where you are in the God and country scale. Do you see our nation as a type of like old Israel, or do you see us more as Babylon? And that shouldn't be an offensive question for Christians.
Right.
Like, we shouldn't be in denial about sin. We shouldn't be in denial about the, excuse me, just the years of decades and decades of brokenness in our country. And it's easy just to point to slavery, but it's not just point to slavery. That's massive, right? We can point to abortion. We can point to Jim Crow, the pornography industry in America, the divorce rate in America. And we're going to like get all defensive and and about that rather than see it as lostness, right? Jesus saw the city and had compassion on it, right? We're told he was broken over it, and we get defensive over it. And that's where patriotism can be a problem, when it blinds us to things. And also, there's no nuance allowed anymore. So if you say America's like a Babylon, all of a sudden you hate the troops and you would rather be socialist. And it's just like, come on. That's not what we're saying here. We're saying there's deep sin in this nation. That's why we need healthy churches. That's why we need to take discipleship really seriously. But we have more in common with a Christian in a communist country than we do a fellow American who doesn't know Jesus. And we have to be able to understand that. I want to read from just real quick from 1 Peter 2, just one verse. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his possession, so that you may proclaim the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. 1 Peter 2:9. We have to be willing to teach people what that looks like. Like, how do we, and I think we're still trying to figure it out. Like, what does it look like for us? This is the church he's talking about. What does it look like for us to act? God has made his own nation, and that is his people. Like, he has made his own race. This is expressed in different colors and different tribes and tongues and languages, absolutely. But he has made a people. So we have to figure out, if we're going to be faithful Christians, what it looks like to first and foremost have that nation, the spiritual, invisible nation that God has made, as our first family, as our first allegiance, as our first loyalty, while also being faithful and grateful for the place where we live here, and to try to be good citizens and make a difference for God's glory, proclaiming his excellencies, as the scriptures say. So, man, we got to figure that kind of stuff out. So when Reagan said, a city shining on a hill, he's such a great speaker, and that's not about America. I mean, that's about the church. Now, there's principles that we can have for our country, but it's for believers. Like, unbelievers can't claim that verse. Like, they can't. So those unbelievers were cheering. Now, Gorbachev tear down this wall, that's different. That's an American thing. Like, we can all get excited about that, right? Like standing in the face of oppression, and that's where the dividing line kind of comes. Like, okay, yes, we are about the common good. We're about human flourishing. Tear down that wall. We're not about trying to use pieces of scripture for America and pretend like we're this amazing, awesome place, when really our sin is deep, deep, deep here. Hope that makes sense.
It makes sense. I think, 2 weeks ago, we talked about this idea of Christians. We're called citizens of the kingdom first. And I think that when we lose that focus, when we lose that conscious, like we are called as citizens of the kingdom, what you were just talking about, it changes the way we see the world, and it erodes. And I think that kingdom mentality, I think a lot of times it's a slow erosion from that mentality. And so all of a sudden, Paul writes, don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, be transformed by the renewing of your minds. And it's kind of this slow fade into God and country, if you will. So I want to just ask you kind of hit on a couple of these things, but let's just say, okay, I want to know, am I infected with this? If I felt sick, I would go to the doctor. What are my symptoms? So what would you say are the symptoms of Christians falling into this God and country cultural Christianity?
Right? I would think that you really struggle with the thought that someone in a different country, even in a country that wouldn't be an ally of ours, I guess you could say, that's a believer, really is more of your family than somebody in your own neighborhood that's not a believer, or even in your own household that's not a believer, sadly. I think that there's a struggle there. We got to ask why. I think we have to go to partisan politics. If you really believe that, like, it's that your political party is the answer for everything, that your real allegiance is there, that you're spending much more time being discipled by cable news network without even realizing it than you are the scriptures and you are your church. But we have people who will miss small group or miss a Bible study, but they won't miss their 9 o'clock slot every night on the couch watching Fox or watching CNN or whatever it might be. I would say also check your Facebook feed. Like, what is it you're passionate about? Like, what is it that makes you unglued? Like for example, any of us, anyone listening to this, you could post something like your favorite Bible verse, and you'll have a few people like it. Somebody will say amen, something along those lines. Post something about politics, you're going to be 15 deep in your comment section. And it might not even be negative. Everyone might agree with you, but that's what brings it about. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what brings about the comments, even if it's positive comments. It's those type of things, because really that's where our passions lie. Like, those are the things that get us the most excited, the most engaged. And that's just a problem. I'm not saying we shouldn't care. I think we have a stewardship to care.
You mentioned partisan politics, and in the book, you talk about how Christians leaning into partisan politics leads to this us and them mentality. So how do you see that happening, and what are the consequences for the church when we fall into that mentality?
Yeah, well, I think it's one, identifying the wrong enemies, right? The wrong battlefield, where it seems like the mission of the church then becomes to get someone to think like us politically, or think like us as Americans, rather than to put people to Christ. I think it's just a mission, just complete. Drift isn't even the word. It's like a different mission altogether. So I think that's the biggest thing, is what it does there. It identifies the wrong enemies, and it gives us a wrong mission. So, I mean, do I have strong political views? Of course, absolutely I do. Yeah. And I think I'm right, and so
Dean has strong views about where to get coffee, he has strong views about everything.
Hey, go all in or be out, baby. But like,
you guys are friends.
My mission is not to get people to vote like me. Do I hope they do? Yeah, absolutely. But that's not my mission. So, and really also, I think when we have to realize also that these are man-made systems. Our political parties are doesn't make them bad. It just makes them not ultimate. It makes them flawed. So when we put all our hope into and here's what's tricky. No Christian would ever say they love their country more than God. No Christian would ever say that they think partisan politics is the mission of the church. No, I've never met a Christian who would admit that. We're just so lacking self-awareness on these things about where we are. So that's what makes it really complicated, is that like reaching a cultural Christian, for example, these people who think they're Christians. It's really hard to reach someone who thinks they're fine.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to have a conversation with an atheist. It's going to be tough, but it's easier because you have a clear starting point. It's unbelief, right? With a Muslim, it's a clear starting point. Maybe what their faith teaches compared to what Christianity teaches. There's your starting point. With someone who thinks they're a Christian, it's like, I'm going to really make you mad because I got to basically deconstruct all you think about your faith that you don't really have. That kind of stuff. So the same is true with what we're talking about, is that it's extremely complicated, because no Christian would ever admit that, like, people things like, politics shouldn't be our God, and our allegiance isn't to a donkey or an elephant, it's to the lamb. It's like every Christian would say amen to that. And that's what makes it problematic, is it's hard to have that conversation.
Yeah. Hey, Dean, your setting's a little different than ours. You're in Leon County, which is actually primarily Democratic. So I'm sure you have to navigate this tension in your church. What do you guys do to kind of help people who have differing and opposing political views kind of work together for the gospel?
Oh yeah, we'll probably be 70% blue on election night, is my guess. Our city government's very liberal. I mean, some of our city government are like Portland liberal. Seriously, right. In terms of their views. So that's tricky. So you're going to be a faithful church, really reaching our community. And you have big colleges here that are extremely liberal, right? So there's Biden signs everywhere in Tallahassee. You are going to have a purple congregation. You're going to have some red. You're going to have some blue. And you're going to have people who don't care too. Okay. So, and those poor people this time of year, they're like, oh my gosh, can we just get on with it? Just preach us the Bible, please. But we have to speak to these things. You can't reach a city as you want it to be. You have to reach it as it is. And so for me, what that looks like in a very purple church is to helping people see what it is we unite around and why the truth really matters, and how the truth is not going to be defined by our political allegiances. It's going to be, defined by Christ. But the natural instinct is to unite around the other things and think that God's on our side with those things. So I always have to just it's not something that we avoid. It's not something we're just careful on. We have to address it directly. I'm doing a series from the third week in October till the week after the election called We the Church. It's a play off of We the People. And it's really going to look at that idea of what does it really actually mean to be a holy nation, and not America, like us, like God's nation, spiritual, invisible nation that he has made called the church. So we're going to build a theology around it and really push our folks to think through it. But the big thing it comes down to is to help people see that it's a problem that our affections are drawn here so often before they're drawn to Christ, and do not for a second think it's the same thing. Because the pushback is always, well, it's not that. It's that my faith informs my politics, which somehow means 100% agreement with every candidate. Somehow it's like, wow, Jesus is running for office. Who knew? Kind of thing. And also things are going to make us a little uncomfortable. Because I think what I'm seeing is that when we talk about things like, we don't pledge allegiance to the right or the left, donkey, lamb, or donkey, elephant, all that stuff. I think in people's minds, they think we're saying be moderate, be in the middle. There's nothing moderate about Jesus Christ.
Right.
Nothing. Okay. That's not what we're saying. We're talking about a completely different ethic altogether that is truly not of this world. And we've got to move from being not of the world, being like Christian cliche, to actually people believing that it's scripture, that Jesus actually proclaimed these things about his people and prayed to the Father about this for his disciples, and how we have to figure out what it means to live that way. We've got to teach people how to live that way. And do it ourselves.
Yeah, I think that is a great way to put that. I've personally felt that tension. It's like if politics were a spectrum, it's like, where does Jesus call me to land on this spectrum? And I think that he calls us to be called out of that spectrum, left, right. He calls us to be above that in the kingdom, and to let that inform how we see things. So that's a great way of putting that. So there, where you are in ministry, as a pastor, how do you address it when people come to you and maybe you're sensing there's a little bit more of an agenda, or there's an assumption that, hey, you're a pastor, you're a Christian, and I have these beliefs, so you have to agree with me because I'm how do you address that? And how have you handled that push even as a pastor in a city where, it's the capital of our state. So it's just a lot more natural conversations.
Yeah, I think that we have to challenge people, and we have to now. This is not one of those things anymore. We can just go, okay, I hear you. And we have to really challenge people on this, not be a jerk off. There are going to be people who are true shepherd, who are compassionate, but we just got to really challenge people on it and help people to see the issues. What pastors are experiencing now is we're almost being critiqued for what we're not rather than what we are. So I've had people leave the church because I'm not woke enough. I don't even know what that means, but I'm not woke enough. And we've had people leave the church because I'm too woke. I still don't know what that means, but so that's kind of like I'm not God and country enough, or others think I'm too that. It's really interesting. I had someone confront me after church one time because I prayed for the president during our prayer time at church, and they thought that was a problem. And they're like, "Well, did you pray for President Obama?" And I was like, yes. Do you want to go back and listen to all the recordings? Yes, I did, and I'll pray for the next president, so I tell you, people have lost their minds, what it's done. And here's another thing too. A lot of it's sinful. Mm-hmm. The absolute just rhetoric being used, the full mind occupation that President Trump has in so many people's minds, how they almost obsess over him in terms of hating him. For how those people were with Hillary Clinton. It's sinful. And we have to talk about those things. Now, notice my theme, I keep going back to we have to talk about these things. We have to talk about these things. It's serious.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How do you challenge in a way where you are speaking truth in love and not being a jerk or coming across as a jerk, I should say.
Yeah. So sometimes there are going to be hard conversations, and tone matters, but a lot of times that's in the eye of the beholder, so we have to be careful that doesn't take us captive, that we're not like handcuffed by what are they going to think. I think that what I'm really seeing is the need to ask this question. What do you mean by that? That's a really important question. So when someone comes and says something like, I think that, we're just, the Baptists are just, Southern Baptists are just going too liberal, and they're down a bad path. Okay. What do you mean by that? And like help me understand, like give me some specific things. And also, where did you hear that from? Where did you read that? Oh, from that website. Okay. Well, I just need you to know, I know it's really easy to get caught up in stuff, and people probably send you links to read. That website is basically the equivalent of a far-right National Enquirer. But like that's what that is. Seriously, so those kind of conversations. Well, what do you mean? Woke, the whole woke thing. What do you mean by that? I think some of the most important questions we can ask right now is what exactly do you mean by that? And really get terms and definitions onto things, so you can really walk with people through things that usually they hear second or third hand because somebody sends them, they saw it on Facebook, someone sends them a link and it gets them worked up about something. And all of a sudden the church becomes the bad guy because you didn't talk about this or you did talk about this, one of the two.
I think of all the things we've learned in 2020, it's that social media is probably the best way to communicate with people.
Absolutely.
Right. And I love what you said. Like, what do you mean by that? And
what do you mean by that?
Conversations, or help me understand that, having those conversations with people face to face, where you can, that diffuses a lot when you can look at someone and you're looking in their eyes and you can read their body language. And I think that maybe that's where we need to go in a future podcast, is how to communicate in a world that's gone mad. I don't know. But so let's just say someone came to you, Dean, and said, hey, how would you, what are some guiding principles as a Christian on how I should vote? Not, what party or, but like, what are some things as Christians, as we're voting, that should be running through our minds as citizens of the kingdom?
I think a few things. One, that God is sovereign. We have to really actually believe that. He's not on the edge of his throne sweating over our vote. I think we think that sometimes. He's not. I think words matter, so I'm very careful how I say this. I say it more as almost like an offering of just thought than a blanket statement. I don't have a Bible verse that says you have to vote. I think you should vote. I think it's good stewardship. I would know. I know that my black friends had grandfathers and great grandfathers who literally were killed, in the Deep South over fighting for the right to vote. So I think it's a good stewardship for people that have given a lot for us to be able to vote. But I think we have to be very careful when the church and Christians are the ones like basically doing get out and vote campaigns. I just don't have a Bible verse that says that. I believe in the sufficiency of Scripture, so I'm not going to tell you have to vote as a Christian. I know that's probably like, again, if that gets you more worked up than anything, the Bible verse for it, you might be God and country. Okay, me saying that. So again, I offer that as just I think it's important to know that. Like, our ultimate duty as Christians is not to vote. I think it's a good thing for Christians to vote. But it's not our. I hope you see the nuance there. But it's not our ultimate duty. Okay, when you're of this world, it's all you have. Like, your entire hope has to be in the election, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why we see people who are secular, especially, like, scream and cry and had support groups on college campuses after Trump won in 2016. It's all they have. If the candidate that I don't like, that I did not vote for, wins, I'm going to do the next day, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to work and I'm going to get after it and do the same thing I was doing before the election, making disciples, right? So now there can be consequences from elections. Yeah, there always are. But there's things I don't want to see happen personally, but that even affect my profession and everything. But it's not ultimate. So I think that's part of it. And then after that, I think we have to really go by our conscience. Like, what are issues that really matter to me as a believer, even before my own life? Like because as a Christian, we are supposed to be giving away, right? We're supposed to be like, not me, but Christ, not me, but others, kind of that sequence. So what do I think is, what do I think is critical for people to, as a Christian? One, I personally would never vote for a pro-abortion candidate. It's just my personal conviction. That doesn't mean I'm going to vote for the pro-life candidate either. I'm just saying I never would vote for the pro-abortion candidate. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do on election day, because I have some conscience issues with character and in the office I think matters, and just things such as that. But personally, I'll tell you one thing I won't be doing. This is just me. It's not City Church's opinion. It's just me sitting in my office in my house, on a call with you guys. I'm not going to vote for a pro-abortion candidate in any election. I wouldn't vote for, the treasurer of Tallahassee if I found out that he was pro-abortion. I wouldn't vote for the Parks and Rec chairman. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't elect the president of the Elks Club if I knew he was pro-abortion. Okay, so do I think there are more issues than just that? Yes, but I don't think you really have any moral ground to stand on if you don't start there. Like, why should I care about issues of life if I don't believe how life begins and don't think that every life matters? Mm-hmm. So that's that. I also want to listen to concerns and differences for people that don't look like me, who aren't from the neighborhoods I'm from, of how they think about things as Christians, how they view things, blind spots I might have. So I want to have as well-informed view as possible. But one thing that I will not compromise on for a moment is that I will not vote for a pro-abortion candidate. And I would encourage other Christians to do the same. That's not me saying that you should just vote for that. That's why I said the freedom is there. The freedom is there not to vote. I'm not recommending that. But the freedom is there as a Christian, and no one should be given a hard time for that, because we don't have a Bible verse that binds us to that. Mm. And that's really what it means to be not of this world. But I want to be faithful and be a good steward here as much as I can. But what do you do when you feel like you don't have options? What do you do?
Yeah, it's like we should not feel at home in our country's current political system, or really anytime there's a political system. That's not our home as Christians. So absolutely.
Since this podcast we're doing is about clarity on muddy issues, are you drinking crystal clear Dr. Pepper, or are you drinking water in a Dr. Pepper
Neither.
Oh,
water.
Okay. Starkey.
Yeah.
I never even heard of that.
And a key lime LaCroix.
Ooh.
Oh,
what? I'm kind of upset.
Everything you just said, everything's disqualified now. You're a dude drinking LaCroix. It's all done.
If I want to taste like Mountain Dew,
LaCroix, I would just put a Tums in a cup of water.
I was upset y'all didn't provide Starbucks for me. So
hey, I just want to, because not everybody knows who you are that is watching this or listening to this, and I have actually met my wife at Ruby Tuesday, and I'm pretty sure I met Dean at Ruby Tuesday as well. There was a church player lunch, so there's a good connection.
Your hands reached for the salad tongs at the same time.
I don't think I've been Ruby Tuesday since. No offense.
I don't think I have either, but I think we both we bonded over smirking at bureaucratic convention stuff.
Totally. I was like, oh, he rolled his eyes too. I have a friend.
But I've known Dean, and Dean's platform has grown over that time. But Dean is the same dude. And Dean is, he's a strong leader, but Dean is a compassionate guy. His staff, if you spend time with his staff, and I've had the privilege of doing that several times, they love him. And they're empowered by him. And City Church is a church that not only is, the biggest church in Tallahassee, but serves their community well, all domains of the community. And a lot of that is simply not because of some weird strategic plan that we have to pay thousands of dollars for to get a consulting group to come and give us, but it's because they're just trying to live out the kingdom. And so, I just want to say, Dean, how much I respect you. And even though you're just a little bit older than me, look up to you and learn from you. And I appreciate your friendship and guidance, and I appreciate you being with us today for sure. I know you got a lot of things on your plate, so thank you, man. Thanks,
man. You're a good friend to me. I'm grateful. And this issue we talked about today, I just really is on my heart, because I really think it is a huge barrier into our discipleship right now and to our mission. And we're so sidetracked right now as churches that we just have to figure out how to redirect. And it's going to be hard. And it's going to take time.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think I've told you this before, but we had a guy in our church, get saved, reading the book, got baptized, and a big part of his testimony was going through that book with some guys. So it's awesome to see that.
So awesome, man.
Yeah,
awesome. Yeah, well, thanks for telling me that, man. That's just huge. That's why that makes it all worth it. That's awesome.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, Dean, thank you so much.
I hope that was helpful. Appreciate y'all having me on and wanting to talk about that. So it really matters. You
are in the Tallahassee area. Dean's phone number is, he would just love to, but be sure and check out City Church in Tallahassee. It's just a great, as James said, a great church living out the kingdom. And we're thankful to be partners in ministry with the kingdom. And that's it. We look forward to you joining us next week on Boggy Talk for part 4, the exciting conclusion to God and Country, where we will neatly wrap up every unresolved issue of our country in 20 to 30 minutes. Thank you for listening to Boggy Talk. Join us next week for week 4 of God and Country. Hey, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a beat.